Hello and welcome. My name is George, and my channel is all about helping you get the most out of Logic Pro so that you can record and produce your best music in your home studio. Today, we're continuing our series of following the song creation process from recording all the way to mixing and mastering. And we're doing this on a song called The Late Night by Camaro 67. And today, we're going to be focusing on mixing drums. So let's dive in. Okay, so here's our session. And as I mentioned, today we're going to be focusing on mixing the drums. And one of the first things I like to do before I enter a new part of the project is just to create a new project alternative. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and just call this Mix Drums. And that way, if I ever need to go back to an earlier snapshot of the project, I can do that nice and easily. So I'll play you a short clip of what it's currently sounding like unmixed. You'll notice nothing has been mixed. There's no plugins on anything, just kind of a rough setting of the levels. And there we are. So let's dive right into this. What I like to do when I'm starting is just to mute all the other tracks that I'm not going to be focusing on. So I'm bass or percussion, congas, guitars, keys, and horns. Mute all of that. And then I usually start with the kick drum. And how I have my tracks laid out is generally how I mix them. So I'll start with the kick, move on to the snare, toms, overheads, and then I'll blend in my rooms last. So although I have a rough kind of level set here, I'm actually going to bring everything down to 0 and start from scratch. Let's just zoom in a little bit here. And since I have multiple kick tracks, 2 at the moment, I'm going to create a track stack specifically just for those kicks. I already have one track stack for the entire drum kit. So right here, but I'm going to have another one within it just for the kicks as well. So if I select my 2 kicks and right click and go create track stack, I'm going to select summing stack, and let's just rename this kicks. So now these 2 kick tracks are going to be sending to this one. So now once I have these 2 kicks blended together, then I'm going to have kind of a master volume just for the kicks. I'll just give a quick little disclaimer. On most of the videos on my channel, I tend to use exclusively Logic plugins, mainly to demonstrate that everything you need is built in right into Logic and you don't need any third-party plugins. However, in saying that, there are a few third-party plugins that I use regularly. And since this mix that I'm demonstrating is actually going to be released and not just used for demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and use some of the plugins that I use regularly. So a lot of those are Logic plugins, but also a few third-party ones thrown in. Having said that, you can still take all the concepts that I use and apply those to really any plugin. So either in Logic or a different third-party plugin as well. So the first thing I'm going to do before I mix anything is actually add some of my preferred plugins to my stereo out here. And I have a channel strip preset saved so that I can easily load that up. So here's my master bus preset. Then you can see that loaded in all the plugins that I use frequently. And by default, I have them all muted. And that way I can load them in as necessary. Now this SonarWorks one, I'm actually going to remove that because that's not actually currently installed. And the ones I am going to turn on is this virtual mix by Slate Digital, this Golfos, this SSL compressor by Slate Digital, and the virtual tape machine by Slate Digital. And I'm going to leave my mastering off and go ahead and close the rest of these. Now, the reason why I load these first is because since everything is running through the master bus here, these plugins are going to change the sound and going to influence my decisions from the very beginning. So if I add all of these at the end, then that's going to kind of change everything that I did before it. So I'm just going to load these on for starters. And then at the end, of course, I'm going to go and tweak these a little bit, especially the compression threshold, for example, would be the main one. And then the mastering, that'll come at the very end. Now, this virtual tape machine, this is one that I like a lot, and I'll put on most of the groups of my instruments. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on my drum group to start as well. I'm going to switch the machine type to 2-inch, and the other settings will compare as we get deeper into the mix, but I'll probably start this at 15 IPS. I usually like that sound the best. Another thing I like to add here is this mix channel. And this just emulates an analog board. And I like to set it to the Brit N, which is a Neve emulation. So go ahead and close that. And actually, I'm going to put that as my first one and my tape machine as the second. And then lastly, I'm going to add that SSL compressor as well, because I really like that for the drum group. And I'm going to set this to the punchy mix preset. And then again, we'll adjust that threshold as we go here. Okay, so let's go ahead and listen to the kick out on its own. And what I'm going to load in for starters, again, the Slate Digital, is the mix rack. I'll stick with mono here. And so this mix rack, basically, it's kind of a bunch of plugins in one. So again, we have that virtual channel set to the Neve. And then we've got a couple of compressors, a couple of EQs, and then this rival plugin and a trim plugin. And you can turn each plugin on and off as you will here. So let's start with maybe this VG Stress, which is modeled after a distressor plugin. And let's just start with the punchy and tight preset and have a listen to that. Cool. So I'm liking how that sounds. So for this plugin, there's no threshold with the compressor like most compressors. So like this one, for example. So in order to hit the threshold, I had to increase the input gain. And you saw the gain reduction meters happening here. And I've got it around kind of 3. And then after boosting the gain, I was peaking a little bit. So then I brought the output down to level that out. Next, what I'm going to do is apply a little bit of EQ, and let's actually get rid of that plugin there. And usually how I approach this is, might seem a little bit silly, but I combine the Logic EQ and these EQ, which we have kind of an SSL model and a Neve model. So I'm going to load in the Logic, EQ, and basically I use the Logic EQ to scan the frequencies that I want to boost and cut, and then I'll mute that and I'll actually do my changes in these plugins because I quite like the sound of this Neve one in particular. So let's go ahead and scan some frequencies and see what we like and maybe what we don't like. Okay, so I boosted, a couple spots in the higher end just to give it a bit more attack, and then found the spot where I kind of like the body of it the most. So we can go ahead and close that EQ. We can even disable it, and I'll turn these on and off so you can hear the difference. It's a lot more attack, right? Than what we're hearing, and just a little bit cleaner overall. So let's close that for now, and let's move on to the kick in. And I'll start just by, again, playing this on its own so you can hear what that sounds like. And this has a lot more attack to begin with. So we probably won't need to add as much of that high end that we did on the first one. But let's take a look and we'll kind of do the same approach we did for the first one. We'll use that same kick punch. Okay, cool. So I'm liking how that's sounding as well. And lastly, what I'll do just to beef this all up is blend a sample into this as well. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this track and call this kick trigger. And I'm going to copy that track down there. And actually, I'm going to remove these plugins. And I'm going to add this Trigger 2 plugin. I'm going to keep it mono. So this is Trigger 2 from Steven Slate. And basically how it works is it'll take your track here and use these to trigger another sample. Now there's a way of doing this directly in Logic. And that is, first you need to flatten this track. But then if you go to track and then select replace or double drum track, and that'll create a MIDI track based on your track, and then you can add any software instrument to it and trigger samples that way. But back to Trigger here, I'm going to go to the browser and I'm going to find a kick that I like. And from previous experience, I know that I like this one right here. So let's have a listen to that. There we go. So just nice, punchy, and fat. You can add in some room mics as well. I don't think I'm going to do that in this case. If I feel like I need them later, then I will do that. And this Z3, there's already a bit of processing to it. The Z1, on the other hand, this is unprocessed. So Z3 is just a bit tighter. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that. And then let's just go ahead and blend these three kick mics together. So now just to compare the before and after, I'll mute the trigger and take these off so you can hear what that sounds like. So quite a bit beefier, right? With the 3 and kind of that compression and EQ that we did. Now I'm going to do just a little bit of compression on this group here just to gel the 3 of those together. And we'll have a little bit of a different compressor here just to switch things up a bit. Let's go for the kick punch. And I'll adjust the threshold. There we go. And I'm just doing a little bit of compression, just like 1 dB. Since they're already compressed individually, this will just kind of glue the 3 of those together. So there's our kick. Let's minimize that. And let's bring the level down a little bit. If we start mixing everything, up high, then we're already kind of peaking there without even adding anything in. So once I've kind of got things where I like them, then I'm just going to bring my levels down. Start with -9, and then we'll see how that all sounds. So let's move on to our snare. And this will be a similar process to the kicks, because again, we've got 2 tracks, snare top and bottom, and then we might add in a sample as well. So I'll go ahead and create a track stack for my snares. Summing stack. Let's call these snares. And why don't we go ahead and add a third one from the beginning here. So let's start with the snare top. So just a little bit of compression there, and then again, going to do my kind of sweep here. So brightening that up quite a bit and getting some more attack in there, and then just rolling off a little bit at the bottom just to kind of get a little bit of that kick out of there without making sure I'm not filtering out any of the snare. So quite a difference there. Now let's move on to the snare bottom and we'll blend that in. Now the snare bottom we can be a little bit more crude with. This is just kind of giving us mostly the top end of the snare, just kind of a bit more smack to it. But the main sound will be from that top mic. Okay, liking that. And then there was just kind of one little ringing frequencies. Kind of sounded like might have just been the congas bleeding through, but just got rid of that to kind of clean things up there. Now let's move on to the trigger. And again, I kind of know one that I have used in this past for this band. So let's see if that works. And now we have to adjust the detail a little bit. So this is where it kind of kicks in. Because, for example, you know, most of the hits are good. But then here we have this build. So you see it missed those first few hits. So let's... There we go. The tricky thing is you want to make sure it's not picking up some of the other instruments that are just getting bled in, or some of the other toms, for example. Like if we look here at the rack tom, yeah, there's not too much bleed, so that's okay. There we go. Okay, great. And now let's blend those three together. Start with the top. Okay, that's a good starting point. And again, just to do a little before and after, so mute the trigger and our plugins. Cool, so a lot more present there. And then the last thing we're going to do is add a little bit of reverb to our snare here. So let's go and create a new bus 9. I'll call this Snare Verb. I'm going to load in the Valhalla Vintage Verb. Could have gone with Space Designer from Logic as well, but I like this Vintage Verb rather. Let's go to plate and snare plate. And for color, I like changing this to 70s. And mode, let's actually change this to smooth plate. And then the decay will adjust as well. There we go. So just adding a bit of space to the snare there. So now the other thing we can do similar to the kick is let's actually compress the whole group here. Let's try this snare punch 1. Cool. And now let's bring the snare down and blend that in with our. Great. I'm liking the way that's sounding. Now let's move on to our toms. Start with our rack tom. And just pan this a little bit wider. Let's go find a spot. Okay, so there's a nice big tom fill that we can focus in on there. Now let's see how much bleed we have in here. Now, if in the song there's not a whole lot of tom action, and if you want to clean things up a little bit, well, then you can kind of just delete what's there and, have your fades. Or another way you can do it is to use a gate, which basically allows the sound to pass or not. So, for example, I'm going to use trigger again to do this. So there's this gate function right here. And basically, what's going to happen, first I'm going to set my details here to make sure those hits come through. So we can see that we're not hearing them. That's because this mix is set to 100. So it's actually still set as if it were to be triggered. So I'm going to put the mix at 0. Now we're hearing everything. And now if I turn on this gate, it mutes everything that doesn't hit that threshold. And then we can adjust kind of where it comes in and comes out. So for example, the hold, let's increase this. Increase it some more. That's probably good there. I'm going to load in the mix rack again. And there's actually a tom preset I quite like. Oh, not the floor tom, the rack tom. And let's actually add in the VCC channel to this. So before and after. Sounding pretty good. So I'm not going to do a whole bunch more to that. And I'm going to do the same thing to these floor toms here. So I'll just go ahead and copy over the trigger 2 and the mix rack. And let's just make sure these are triggering okay. Great. And now here we have to make sure those all get triggered. Maybe I'm going to increase the hold a little bit. Great. Okay. And let's change this preset from the rack tom to the floor tom. And again, I'll add the virtual console back in. Let's check the compression. Now this one, the trigger was a little bit off again. So let's bring that detail down. Okay, so some of those cymbals are coming through here. That's okay for now. If we really want to, we can, as I said, we can just cut those out physically. Sometimes if I want the toms to sound bigger, then I'll add some reverb, but I don't think I'm going to in this case, or at least not for now. So now let's go and listen to this fill here and add in our toms to our kick and snare. That's pretty good there. Add the floor tom. Okay, so the floor tom actually might need a little bit more work. When we listen here, there's kind of a weird frequency. So actually try and EQ that out. Better, but there's still a little bit of something bothering me. Okay, that's sounding a little bit better. Okay, now let's move on to the overheads. And for these, once again, I will create a track stack since I've got left and right, but I want to be able to deal with those together. I've got these panned, hard, left and right. And these are mostly going to be used for the cymbals. So actually I'm going to start with an EQ and I'm going to kind of filter out a lot of the stuff that I don't really need. So just getting rid of a lot of the room sound and the kick and snare and kind of the bass that's bled in. So I'm not actually going to compress these at all. Just a little bit of a boost, but mostly taking stuff out. Okay, let's blend those in now. Great. So those are all the drums done. Now, the one thing I'm going to add to this is the room mic. And on its own, it sounds like this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to EQ some of the room out a little bit and then really over compress this. And it's going to sound really trashy and not all that great on its own. But when it's blend in with the drums, it's going to just bring everything up a little bit to make it sound nice and punchy. So actually, I'm going to begin with the over compression and then I'll EQ before the compressor, but I want to hear what it sounds like with the compressor. And then things are overbearing, then I'll kind of filter those out. So as I said, quite trashy. Now let's bring that in with the rest of the drums. So just a little bit in there and it just kind of brings them to life. Now, the last thing we'll do is just check our plugins on our drum bus here. Great. And then let's do a little before and after. So here's the before. So a lot punchier, a lot more in your face. So next up for this, we still have the horns to overdub, which we're going to be doing real soon. And I'll show you that process. And then we'll move on to mixing everything else once we have those horns in there. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. And I also want to thank you for all the likes and subscribes. And if you want to improve your workflow in Logic Pro, don't forget to download my free Ultimate Logic Pro Starter Pack. This includes my Logic Pro Hotkey Cheat Sheet with all the most common shortcuts right at your fingertips, my mixing guide with all the most common Logic Pro plugins and settings, and my audio recording guide so that you have a checklist you can follow to make sure that all of your recording sessions go flawlessly, as well as my gear guide if you're just getting started and want to know exactly what you should get. And lastly, my Logic Pro session templates to get you up and running right away. So again, hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.